Hi there, everyone. I'm Meg-John Barker, and welcome to the Bi-Fi Festival panel on mental health in lockdown. I'm joined by some excellent people today who are going to talk about mental health and all things LGBTQ+, and particularly around what's going on in lockdown. So I'm going to start by inviting everyone to introduce themselves. Would you like to go first, Kevin?
Yeah, my name's Kevin Morosky. Right on the spot. I feel like really embarrassed all of a sudden.
Very welcome here.
Kevin Morosky, exec producer on Community Podcast, also co-founder of that podcast, and also co-founder of POC, which is, POC stands for People of Culture Collective. So it's a collective of Black and Brown people and other ethnic minorities across creative industries, just with the view to kind of make things easier and better for all of us. And within that, we have different pockets of kind of groups, from a POC women's group to a POC LGBTQ plus group and stuff like that. So yeah, and then day-to-day advertising, creative director and filmmaker. I think that's it. I'm going to stop now.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let's go to Julia next.
Hi, I'm a criminal psychologist and a bisexual researcher. So I am bi, and I also founded the Bisexual Research Group recently, which is a collective of researchers from different disciplines to look at how we can better understand the bisexual and plurisexual experience. And so I'm interested in all things about bisexuality, but especially sort of scientific backgrounds that might help us explain the experience that probably many of us have.
You've also written about evil, I noticed.
I have, yes. I was a criminal psychologist. I actually came out in evil. So my second book, I wrote about why people do bad things, and there's a whole chapter on sexuality and how that's often inappropriately, of course, associated with evil and taboo. And in it, I come out because I found that I was being hypocritical, telling people that the world needs more people, ideally, who are talking about these things, and I wasn't even out. So that's how I came out.
Thank you. Then let's go to Anick. I see you just unmuted. Let's have you next.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, first I want to go and read Evil now. So
right.
Before I go and do that once I've finished this. My name's Anick. I am an activist, primarily focusing on intersex issues. I'm intersex. I also am part of the core team for UK Black Pride, and I do a lot of work around children's rights and mental health.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And finally, Tess.
Hi, I am Tess. First of all, I am the Vice Chair of Bi Pride UK. So thank you all very much for agreeing to be here. It's really nice to have you all and for everybody to give up their time. And secondly, I am a psychotherapist, and I work exclusively, my client group are gender, relationship and sexually diverse communities. And I also work for social care.
Thanks. Such a wonderful spread of experience that people have to bring to bear on this topic. I should say really briefly who I am as well, although mostly I'm going to shut up because I'm the chair and listen to everybody else. But I write self-help type books and comics around mental health and gender, sexuality and relationships. And this is topics really dear to my heart because during lockdown, I've been doing a lot of work with my own mental health around post-traumatic stress and blogging about it a lot on my website, Rewriting the Rules, and also podcasting about it on my podcast, Meg, John and Justin. So yeah, if people are interested in that, feel free to go to those places. So what I want us to talk about, I've got three main questions, but also anything that the panelists want to bring up themselves, but definitely to talk about mental health in the context of LGBTQ plus people, to also talk about what other aspects of experience and identity intersect with those in relation to mental health, and then to talk about how is this relevant particularly during lockdown. So those are the themes we're going to touch on. So it'd be great to just hear from people to start with on their thoughts on why mental health is such an important topic to consider in relation to LGBTQ plus people. Shall we go in the other order? Shall we start with Tess? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's such a big thing. So to narrow it down to answer that question's really difficult. So I think to answer that, I'm going to have to kind of grab from my own experiences of going through the mental health system as a queer person. I have been through all that. I've had to deal with the mental health system and the stereotypes that have been kind of put on me And a couple of years ago, for other reasons, I requested my notes, and it kind of came to light that I got given a fairly major mental health diagnosis based on some very shoddy stereotypes. And so I kind of reached out to the internet and was like, hey, how many, this is my experience, how many others? And I got like bombarded of like, yes, me too, this is me too, this is me. So there's all of these kind of normative values being placed on queer people, which then is resulting in pretty major diagnoses which have pretty intense stigmas attached to them. So that's, for me, why it's really important to talk about, to be like, this is going on.
Thanks so much, and yeah, thanks for sharing from that experience. I think the research bears it out that again, most marginalised groups are overdiagnosed and often treated in really poor ways in relation to this. Do you want to pick up on that, Anick?
Yeah, so I think for me, the reason why I think it's so important is because there's an overrepresentation generally of people who have all kinds of mental health issues within our different communities. And when you add the different layers to do with our sexuality or romantic relationships, as well as sex characteristics, gender identity, all of those things onto that, it's like you're going to fill yourself up and up and up with lots of different things to think about all the time. It's very stressful. So if we don't find time to talk about it or seek support, if we don't know about other people who are going through similar things like us, it can just add to the general low mood and things that people face. And generally, we know that there's a lot of bisexual people who don't even come out. So if there are all of those people out there suffering, or living more accurately, I always say this, I always get stuck on my words, but I always used to say that I suffer from mental health issues, but now I've chosen to start trying to say I live with mental health issues, because sometimes I can manage them. It's a very weird little semantic thing, but it's something I've been trying to do, and I always mess up because I always say suffering first. But I'm trying to get people to understand that it's just an extra layer that we don't need. It's something that is just always there, and the more we talk about it, the more we reach out to our own communities as well. We start to familiarize everyone with the experience of mental health, and we can stop talking about it in terms of good and bad and evil and things like that. We can start just saying, okay, these are healthy experiences and unhealthy experiences, and we can work towards making things better.
I was wondering for you as well, are there particular connections between mental health struggles and intersex community? I'm thinking about the issues around non-consensual surgeries, which must be extremely traumatic, and often things being kept secret in families. Is that kind of thing?
Yeah. So for me, there are a lot of different factors. I was surprised. People are often surprised when they find out I've not had psychological support growing up from any kind of professional. Even at 14, when I tried to take my own life, everyone kind of knew it was about my body. And at one point, I overheard a nurse say, well, if I had a body like that, I probably would have killed myself too. So all that kind of stuff is the thing that I, as an intersex person, have had to grow up with. My first surgery was at 4 months old. But then the worst thing for me is when I do the research, when I've started talking to people now, things are changing. And families need support as well. It's not just us. It's our families that need support. So there are no accurate statistics out there on how many people have variations of sex characteristics or count themselves as intersex. But I'd be surprised if probably like most of them didn't have mental health issues as well.
I think so, given that degree of trauma. And thanks for highlighting the family issue as well, because I think so often mental health problems get located in the individual, but particularly in terms of queer people, those families are often not accepting in ways that are traumatic. So like locating it in the family is really appropriate.
I was going to say, as we talk about stigma and shame, it is one of those layers I was talking about earlier before. So not only do you have to hide your sexuality or your body or who you feel you are inside, you also have to hide the mental health conditions, because depending on your background, that also might be a problem. So mental health issues run in my family, not that anyone would talk about it. So especially within the South Asian community. And many people I know have the same experience.
Yeah, and I think those layers of shame absolutely really contribute. Thank you. Julia, what are your opening thoughts on this?
Thank you for sharing all that. I think that there's a lot of people right now in lockdown who probably are going through some really difficult things with their families in various ways because they aren't able to come out, or they have come out and maybe their family, who they're now forced to live with in very close quarters, aren't understanding, aren't supportive, or even worse, are toxic or aggressive or worse to them. So I think that, research just came out showing that particularly bisexuals seem to be increasing the frequency at which they access helplines. And that might be because bisexuals, certainly in the UK, so this is research from the UK, are among the least likely to be out to family and friends. And so that, combined with a lack of community, can, I think, put you at particular risk for, even more anxiety than people might be feeling already, that might exacerbate their mental health concerns. And so for me, I know that over this period, it's been, I kind of feel like in some ways I've been in sexuality lockdown for my whole life, because I've only recently discovered that there's a bisexual community. It was a whole revelation for me. And it's so important to your own identity, or it was to mine anyway, to feel like there's other people to talk to and who've all got such very different lived experiences, and to compare and contrast them, and to sort of really open up your mind to that. So I think the good piece is that I think it has in some ways brought together researchers. That was lockdown and COVID. It's brought together people to reach out to each other, to check in on each other, maybe in ways that they wouldn't have before. But of course, on the other hand, especially if you're in a space that isn't safe for that, you might not be able to or know how to access these kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. And that kind of support is such a buffer against mental health struggles, as you say. Thanks a lot. Kevin, what are your opening thoughts about mental health and LGBTQ plus people?
I think probably sits closer to Anick's. Did I say your name correctly, or did I? Okay, great. Can you imagine Anick's perspective? And I think my experience is dealing in intersectionality. It's like, what battle am I choosing today? What conversation am I having today? Is it to do with being Black? Is it to do with being gay, religion, all of these things that fold into culture? For me personally, I think in terms of being gay and coming out, I don't have that kind of big coming out story with a big, there was a war and then I found myself. Oddly enough, where I'm from, let's say, I learned how to take care of myself very early. So those kind of conversations of bullying, like, it just wasn't a thing because I could handle myself. So with that being said, it was like, oh, I fancy boys. That was the end of that journey. And I more so put more time into navigating this world as a Black man. Then this weird thing happens where you get to a certain age and you realize all of these microaggressions. You start to pick up language, right? Language that you've never had before for all of these things that are going on. But to name things and put them on shelves and be like, oh, that happens because of this and that. You start to unlearn, and then you start to, well, in my case anyway, start to revert back and look at the things that you kind of put to the side because you were concentrating on this one thing, if that makes sense.
Do you want to just say what microaggressions are, if any viewers might not be familiar with that? Yeah.
What is the best way to describe them? Microaggressions are kind of just interactions genuinely with people outside of your culture or skin folk, that they probably deem actions they probably deem harmless, but actually act as like little cuts. It's always been said, like the most painful way to die is those 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
And those are microaggressions that can come down to, oh my gosh, you talk quite well for a Black person. Oh, first cut. Oh my God, your hair, hand in hair, like second cut. And by the end of the day, you probably have like 1,000 cuts. You then react to that last 1,000th cut, even though that's the first time you've interacted with that person. And then the next cut comes in, like, why are you so aggressive? Why are your people this, da la 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 la? To answer your question, mental health is really important. And I think especially in the LGBTQ plus community, as well as other marginalized groups that are dealing with more than one layer, it's very important to kind of take a check of that. And I think everybody has to kind of find their own way of navigating that. I don't think there's one way. For me personally, monitoring my mental health now lies in what I've done with my hair or haven't done with my hair, and if I've actually paid attention to it in the past week or so, and it's like it needs greasing or a wash or any of those things, and I realize like I've been in my own bubble and not my physical health, and that all kind of leads down, and that's my personal roadmap.
Thanks so much, and that it really takes us on nicely to the next question, which was, what other aspects of experience or identity intersect with being LGBTQ plus in their impact on our mental health? And you've really nicely highlighted there that it's so important to be aware of that intersection of race and sexuality, for example, and gender. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from the other panelists about, again, either your own personal experience of that intersection between different aspects of your experience and or more, research-based or therapy-based understandings of how these things intersect. Do you want to go next, Julia, on that one?
Sure. I mean, for me personally, the intersection is between being a scientist, being a woman, especially a young woman, and being bi. And so part of the reason I didn't come up before is because I was worried that people wouldn't take me seriously, because I was already heavily sexualized as a young woman and a scientist. And I dared to speak publicly about things. And so that was already a terrifying experience in of itself. Then to throw in bisexuality into the mix, which as we all know is highly sexualized, it wasn't something I was willing to do. I wasn't brave enough basically at the time. And so I started with the science piece, and then I introduced bisexuality. Now I'm going all in. It's like big bi flags everywhere. Because I know that for me, seeing that visible representation in the sciences, which doesn't happen very often for bisexual people, every time I still see someone, I get really excited. Like, there's people like me in this particular space, even if it's not my discipline. I'm just excited, and I feel like a younger me would have appreciated that so much. I mean,
and you highlighted a really important one, I think, particularly in this time of Me Too, that the stats seem to bear it out, that the likelihood of bi women particularly experiencing sexual assault and sexual harassment is particularly high, and that will have a knock-on effect on,
for sure. And just the invisibility. I think invisibility does get to you, because you feel like pride is happening, people are starting to wear rainbow lanyards and you're not wearing one, and then you're going, why am I not feeling comfortable to do that? And I think as soon as someone in your surrounding, or it helps certainly when people are in your surroundings start coming out more as well in that way, even if they're not expressing exactly what that lanyard represents to them.
Again, I'm guessing most people watching will know what bi invisibility is, but sorry, I've just got a very loud car going past it. Do you want to just say quickly what bi invisibility is for anyone who's not familiar? So
bi invisibility is exactly what it sounds like, which is that bisexual people are often invisible. Bi erasure is related, which is that sometimes also bisexuals are erased from the conversation. And so, I mean, writing my book right now on bisexuality and science, the number of times that the acronym, or that LGBT, the B is in there, right, gets used, and then they just gloss over the B, or they'll say, well, there's been nothing on bisexual, so let's just include them in the homosexual category. It's really interesting and really depressing, because obviously the experiences are unique of every letter in the alphabet of sexuality, but that's what it means.
Right. So just based on what Julia said, it's often a situation where if you're bisexual, if you're dating a woman and you are a woman, then automatically people will view you as a lesbian. Whereas if you are a man dating a man, gay. So when it comes to being erased or invisible, it's even when you go to events at Pride where you're meant to be part of this community, people are looking at you like, oh, wait, you're straight, why are you here? It makes me wonder why bisexual people are often included in the acronym when they're not meaningfully included in the conversation. Things like Bi Pride are very important, because without Bi Pride, it's not meant to be a separate thing. People often say this to me about UK Black Pride. Why do you need your own pride? It's not about that. It's not about separating ourselves. It's about giving ourselves a platform, giving ourselves a space, so that the younger versions of ourselves and the older versions, who often are also forgotten, get to see our identities and just feel part of something for once. Because being bisexual is something that is, people will have their own opinion on it. Some people will use it as a stepping stone and pretend that it's just there for people to not actually be, but just flip into in and out. And then other people will have different experiences of it. And it's just so frustrating when you are bisexual and you have to deal with this constant thing. For example, on TV, on movies, in books, whenever there's a bisexual character, they're never actually allowed to be bisexual, are they? It's always they're cheating on their partner and suddenly they are now the opposite of what they were, which is apparently straight at first, and now they're no longer straight. And I used to see it growing up all the time on like EastEnders and things like that. Probably shouldn't have been watching EastEnders as a kid, but you know, that kind of thing. And for myself, as someone with hidden disabilities as well, and that's another factor to put onto it. And so I remember as an adult, or I think I was probably about 21, so I'm 25 now. So when I was 21 and first seeking out psychological support, someone actually said to me, this was a mental health professional, I seem to get all the worst ones, but one of them said to me, well, it makes sense that you're bisexual, really, because you're intersex. And I was like, what? Where does that come from? My latest therapist who I have was brilliant, the complete opposite. And he was actually a gay man who was also from a South Asian background. So it was really helpful to find someone to talk to in that sense who maybe didn't have the same experience as me, but had similar experiences. When it comes to all of the different factors, it's not only who you are on the outside, it's things you grew up with. So what culture you're part of, if you have money, if you don't have money, the kind of education you've had as well. I often find that activism, queer activism in particular, is very academic. If I don't write something that sounds like it should be published, it often gets ignored, or otherwise people will just gloss over it and say, okay, it's just someone else's opinion, when actually it's not an opinion, it's just not worded in a language that people don't understand. So it's this battle where you're trying to be vocal about something. There are so many bi activists I know who are trying so hard to just get their voice out there, but then they're not being heard or listened to.
I think that's really spot on, and I really appreciate that point as well about multiple invisibilities. So if you've got the invisibility of bisexuality and intersex and hidden disabilities as well, like that's sort of, you can imagine a kind of cumulative effect of multiple invisibilities, which I hadn't really thought about before. I was just also
jump in on
do jump in. I'm gonna park my point for the end. Go for it, Tess.
As someone who does come under the disabled kind of banner, you get the PIP benefits, you know, I get, you know, I'm official, you know, I've got the paperwork to prove it, and go out and wave my blue badge and be like, look, yeah, I am really disabled. And that is really difficult because there are some people that don't have that. They don't have that that card that gives them that apparent authenticity within the hidden space. Even men, I will sometimes still use a walking stick, even on days that I don't need it, in order to not get the harassment or the potential harassment for accessing things or resources, in order for me not to need my walking stick. But if I use them and I don't have my walking stick, then I'm open to that harassment. So it's like, well, I'm using them in order to then not need my walking stick for that period of time. But I'm going to use it and have it just to be like, here is this visual representation of my ability to actually access this resource. So all of you people who would harass me anyway, look, I've got this thing that says, yes, I'm legit.
Where I was on the tube just after, I think it was the day I got discharged from hospital, and I had a walking stick at that point, and someone behind me was really frustrated that I wasn't walking fast enough. I think they were behind someone who was behind me, and they shouted, can you hurry up? Obviously not seeing that I was the one causing the delay. So I just stopped, turned around and shouted, I'm sorry, my disability is inconvenient for you. And people just looked at me like, oops, like what happened? But that often also, not in the same sense, but happens to bisexual people. If you aren't dating someone or haven't dated someone who is a different gender to you or is the same gender as you or something like that, there's also that kind of fight that happens. So I've got a friend who has never dated a woman and never dated a man, but he knows he's bisexual. I've got one friend who's pansexual. They've only dated people who are a similar gender to them, but that doesn't mean they're not pansexual. But it's this constant debate, which is kind of linking into this whole visible idea of disability as well. It's this whole being visible and performing for other people.
Exactly. And I think when it comes to mental health, it's just so important to be mirrored accurately by the people around you. In terms of mental health, we know what a big deal that is and how traumatizing it can be if you're not. And all these things we're kind of touching on involve not being accurately mirrored. Tess, did you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, just kind of linking it in, it is that idea of performing in order to avoid difficulties which are then going to cause more distress, but by then performing you're necessarily then also causing yourself distress as well. So it's kind of this catch-22 situation. And then before you go out, you have this distress by the decision of which one are you going to take, and then linking it into kind of the bisexuality, pansexuality. You have that as well within going out into spaces. So are you going to perform to fit in with the straight world? Are you going to perform to fit in with the queer world, depending on which space you're going in? Which way are you going to perform? Which gender are you dating? How are you going to fit that? It's not a case of just going, oh, I'm going to leave the house. It's a case of, where am I going? Who am I going with? Who am I going to see? How am I going to be perceived? How safe is it for me to say things about who I'm with or who I'm dating? Do I just use the word partner? Do I use boyfriend? Do I use girlfriend? Like, it's all of these things that you have to quickly go, okay, which these like processes that I think a lot of us do kind of automatically now. So we have that hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance, exactly, yeah. And it's a lot of extra emotional labour as well.
Yeah, so I think it just leads to just so much tiredness. And if you're dealing with any sort of mental health distress anyway, it takes its toll.
Okay, so mindful of time, just moving to the last question. And I wanted to ask people's thoughts on, what are the mental health implications of the kind of current cultural moment? Obviously, the global pandemic and lockdown, but also recently the Black Lives Matter protests around the US and also the UK, and the kind of statistics that are now coming out about the ways that COVID-19 is particularly impacting people of colour, poor people and older people. Could we start with you, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about gaslighting, because I think what's happening at the moment and what you're seeing, or at least from my perspective and how I feel, for the most part, there's a lot of gaslighting within the world, right? For women and different marginalized groups. But just speaking from my perspective as a Black man, again, if we're talking about those microaggressions, and if you do call them out, and then after a while, you either start to believe those things, or, they do kind of get to you, and then you build up defenses, and you almost forget the original person that you are or were meant to be, because you're just spending all of this time drawing for your defenses and your weapons to protect you and all of these things. So at the moment, initially lockdown, I'm not going to lie, I am an introvert and I'm a Virgo. So I'm not going to lie.
Yay, lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, great.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Getting back to the things that I like to do with my hands, and just arts and crafts and things like that, and the earth and plants and water, and I've been content and happy, and I haven't had to go into an office and wait and count down to the lady clutches her bag in the lift, and the security guard who's known my face for the past like 6 months at this particular building once again wants to see all of these things, right? And in a bit of a bubble, I haven't had to go outside and interact with a world that is racist 24/7, violent and horrible and sickening. I've been able to just stay in and make art. Now, within that, there's things going on the news that you pick up on, and you're still, you almost, I personally built up a bit of energy to be able to tackle those things, because I've been able to be at home. Okay, I'm in a good place, and I'm going to write a letter to this, and I'm going to do stuff you do on adrenaline, I guess, anyway. But I've been able to do it now from a space of I'm actually engaged. And then with Black Lives Matter and George's death and Belly's death over here, and then that stuff being overturned, just been like, oh, we're closing the case. And it's like, but what do you mean? The realization of like white people being like, oh my God, like racism is real. It's just a bit, half of you is just like, finally, but the other half is just like, you're infuriated because it's like, you really start to take on board the amount of gaslighting that has gone on for your whole life. So it's, as I said, today's been heavy because there are moments of like, oh my God, you guys are really talking about this and you're really trying to learn, and I hope this is going somewhere. But at the other end of the spectrum for it, I guess there's a space of just like, we should have been listening in the first place. Like, did you not see my tears? Did you not see my pain? Look at all the stories, look at all the examples of what's been going on. To pass on, because I know about time, I think there are a lot of confused Black people and Black and brown people also, just confused and exhausted and tired. I was talking about this earlier, and I think initially when, you know, you saw through all the timelines of like, I'd imagine all of your Black friends just, I'm tired. And there were some comments around that, and I was like, do you think we all have like a 0800 number where we call up and we decide on the messaging of what we're going to say? Or do you think actually we're all saying these things because individually this is where we're at and this is where we feel, this is how we feel? There is a release, but there's also like, it's scary to release as well, because you're like, yeah, but are we really going to go all the way with this? Or it's like, oh, can I let you in? Are you going to break my heart? Like, yeah. So, yeah.
We know the impact that gaslighting has in families, and the amount of trauma that leaves people with. So this sense of like, I think Kevin's sense of this like cultural gaslighting, it's the same, you know, it has just as big an impact, perhaps a much greater impact as well.
100%. And if you double that back to then your original question, like how many levels can you be gaslighted on at one time? And what does that do to you?
Yeah, so I guess this is one of the issues of wearing so many hats right now. Also working with UK Black Pride, I've encountered so many people not knowing British history around Black Lives Matter. People don't know, for example, yesterday I posted about how it wasn't until 2015 that we finally stopped paying off a debt to slave owners for the emancipation of slaves. So in 1833, when Britain abolished slavery, they couldn't afford to pay off the slave owners because slave owners had lost property. So then in 1835, they received a private loan. It was all £20 million back in those days, which is equivalent to around 20 billion today. It only stopped being paid in 2015, and who knows if that's even true. So these families are still influential and powerful, and people are just like, oh, but it's an American issue. It's got nothing to do with us. Police brutality happens here as well, and racism exists everywhere. So I saw some very great posts about lockdown and treating racism like you do COVID-19. Assume you've got it and work to be anti-racist. Because one thing that's been really frustrating, so over the past few days I've not had much sleep because I've not been prioritizing my self-care. Instead, I have been creating content and trying to share lots of information about what's going on. Primarily because I'm learning right now. That's what I'm trying to do. That's my way of coping. I'm trying to find out what's happening in the world. But also, I want to disseminate that information around to other people. But then the problem with that is it then adds to things that I'm constantly getting random messages from strangers debating with me about whether racism exists. Going back to mental health, which is the main thing, try and look after yourself. I'm not doing that right now, even though I should be, and it's really taking a toll. I've been on my own now in a tiny box room for the past 2 months or longer. I finally found a great way to cope, and that is there's so many apps out there for mental health. What I'd want to say to people is take time for yourself. It is a lot going on in the world right now, but stop doing what I'm doing, which is being glued on your phone, constantly reading all the bad news, all of this stuff happening, and not taking time to just be offline for a bit. And if you are offline, continue doing some work and looking after yourself and not doing anything at all. I'm not saying just go offline and ignore all the issues that are happening in the world. I'm saying substitute some of that time for something else. I've started reading a book called Lost Connections, which is how to find hope when you're depressed. That's really teaching me a lot about the history and the science behind pharmaceuticals. And I've been taking antidepressants for years now and going to therapy and trying to do everything I can But I guess what they don't teach you and what they don't really talk about is mental health is for life. It's not just, okay, you have this problem and it's going to last 6 months, you're going to have some medication or therapy and it'll be fine. It's something that's going to keep going. And if you are bisexual and you have to hide that, and if you are a member of the queer community, if you have any other problem as well, there's only a matter of time that all of this stuff is going to be trapped in your little funnel, and it's just going to be too tiring.
I think that's such good advice, the combination of balancing self-care and education, you know, and again, maybe education about mental health, but also education about these wider issues that are coming up, and having that balance so that you're able to. I'm really mindful of time that I don't want to keep anyone here longer than they're able to. So I wondered if Tess and Julia, you would want to finish with, again, any fairly brief thoughts about how people can look after themselves.
The thing for me that I think people kind of, the misnomer is about going to therapy is only for people that are kind of on breakdown, and that's just not true. I think therapy is really good for anyone and everyone. I mean, I think as a therapist, you might accuse me of being a bit biased. You know, I'm a therapist in therapy. It's good for me. And I think people don't realise that a lot of therapists sliding scales of fees. There's this belief that therapy is like really super expensive. I mean, I appreciate that for some people, even the lower scale is still out of reach. So I'm going to kind of put that there, and I appreciate that. For others on low incomes, there are therapists, and we do like concessionary slots. I also want to, just before finish, kind of give space to the Black African and Asian Therapy Network. They're a directory of therapists specifically there, and you can see that their website is baatn.org.uk, and I know there's a fund, I don't know the website offhand, but there is a fund specifically being set up to get Black people access to therapy. So I don't know if we'll be able to kind of put that in a link for the...
Find therapists that are similar to you or have some kind of experience that you may share. I just want to quickly plug that there's a charity I volunteer for called The Mix, and they provide free essential support to under 25s on any issue at all. And compared to NHS waiting times, which can be up to 6 months for a free session, we have a waiting time of up to 2 weeks at times. So it's called themix.org.uk.
I think it will hopefully try and get some notes set up with a few of these links in, because I was also thinking about some of the LGBT organisations that provide free and low-cost therapy that would be good to flag up for anyone who isn't able to afford private therapy. Julia, any final thoughts from you?
No pressure. I mean, I think that everybody has a therapy or lack of therapy that'll suit them. So for me, for example, therapy is not the right place for me, and I absolutely hate it. And I think that is perfectly acceptable as well. So I think not feeling like you need to go to therapy either, but if that's a good fit for you, then great. So for me, instead, I struggle with anxiety and depression. The way that I deal with that is focusing on, whilst trying to stay in touch with the news, there is research that shows that if you're constantly engaging with the news, no matter what day, like there's always something horrible happening in the world. And it does impact your mood, and it does contribute to anxiety and depression. And so limiting your use of social media. My partner has parental controls on my phone for me. That's one way that I keep my anxiety in check, is that I need to ask for additional access. And that means that I can't get into these loops on social media that just get me deeper and deeper and deeper and sadder into things that I have limited control over. The other thing is I really like focusing on art and astrophysics, actually. So taking your mind almost off planet. I'm a big fan of science fiction. I'm a big fan of sort of thinking sort of about the future, what we could be, and sort of really trying to keep your mind also on the really big picture rather than on things that you know are going to distress you. And so sort of being able to disengage in that way.
Brilliant. I think that's so important. And collective forms of support as well are another, where that's not necessarily therapy and it's not necessarily high cost, but what we can be doing to support each other's mental health in a kind of support groups and peer-to-peer settings. Thanks so much, everyone. That was just absolute gold, every single word. And I hope that people have enjoyed it. I meant to say, if you enjoyed this and want to support the other work that Bi Pride UK are doing, to support LGBTQ plus communities, have a look at their merchandise shop and donation page for ways that you can help. That's byprideuk.org. And again, we'll try and put some of the links that have been mentioned here, so that if there's other groups that you'd like to support and donate to that we've been touched on, you can do so. Thanks everyone so much for a really great conversation. Really appreciate it.